Okay, this is, okay. I went and told my grandmother that I was going camping for a few days to try to think things over. She nodded benevolently but thoughtfully and said if I thought that would help to go ahead. An extra pair of pants and a blue shirt, and I was out in the sunlight heading off. I felt whore and hound this morning, raring to go, and I was glad to see Chad and his duffel bag standing by a big fountain, the one nervous and the other bent. Chad looked as though he thought I might try to strangle him, but hell, today was the day. We were leaving it all behind. I didn't even think about it the night before. We sat on the fountain in the mist that blew from it, snorting and pouting and pointing, until the T-Bone drove up in his old Rambler. He was half asleep and scratched his hairy stomach all the way out to the highway while we tried to get him to come along and bring his car. Ha ha. But he was hung up for a while with some girl and couldn't leave until he could convince her to come too, or something like that. We almost had him convinced for a while there, but he swore he'd meet us in New York and kicked us out across from an Atlantic service station on US 1, just where the speed limit turned to 55. T made a U-turn and drove off back to town, and there we were, on the edge of town and outward bound. On the other side of the thumb, we winked back at scowling parents driving their kids to pieces. I had a sheath knife in my back pocket in case I had to carve any belly, and Chad kept saying, "That's a concealed weapon." So I put it on my belt, and he really didn't like that at all. That's a revealed weapon. We finally compromised, and I wound up wearing it in sight, but behind me. I don't know what I was wearing for a belt, but it must have been some stretchy material because the knife hung back there like a tail. It was a hot morning, and after 2 hours, with no luck, we decided that people should know where we were going. So we threaded through the heat waves to the gas station and asked the guy if he had some cardboard and a magic marker we could make a sign with. He gave us a marker and said, "That's right, boys. You gotta have a sign. Lots of folks that's going a long ways will think you're just going to the next town if you don't have a sign. I used to hitch all around the country, and I always had a sign." And he said there were some cardboard boxes behind the garage as he gave us the marker. We walked around back on broken glass and made our sign. Back by the road, we put it up so the speed limit read New York City, and we got it right quick. As we ran to jump in, the station attendant lit a cigarette and waved to us with the hand that held the match to put it out. Our benefactor was a fat, boring businessman who didn't say a word all the way to Daytona Beach, where he let us out, saying, by way of apology and a little plaintively, that he had to go see his mother. We walked along the road looking for a shady spot to hitchhike from and worried about cops. They're pretty eager in Daytona, always trying to catch some poor slob giving teenagers a bad name. As soon as we staked out under a tree, an old clunker Plymouth with a couple in it stopped. "Hop in," she said. "We're taking your life in your hands, but you're welcome." It was a big old car inside, and we had plenty of room for us and our stuff in back. We relaxed with our feet up on the duffel bag and looked out the windows at all the cars that wouldn't have picked us up. Our driver said his name was Michael, and that they were going to Washington, D.C., which was fine with us. He was brimming with their story, which was all about how was this car and about $75. They planned to get married and take a little apartment in Washington and hoped like hell that he could find a job. They wanted to be married and stay in Florida, but their parents had given them par for the course, so Michael had kicked Susan's father up and down his front yard just before they left. In spite of that, he wasn't too smart and kept tearing hell out of the gears trying to beat other cars out of stoplights. But the car kept moving, and Chad and I didn't say anything. We were never anything but inanely cooperative when we were hitching, because a lot of people would throw you back on the road if you so much as belch. Chad tells me he's lost many a ride by falling asleep with a runny nose. I thought that was pretty funny. I could just see him dripping and oozing with his head back over the seat while the driver stared real hard at the road with his lips pressed together. That night it seemed as if we'd been driving through Georgia forever. When we stopped at a roadside "we have everything" place, Susan was asleep, and the three of us went across the gravel to the halo from the bare bulb above the door, and I got clay under my fingernails from off the latch. Inside there were all sorts of country products and a big can in the corner marked Gargoyle Arctic Oil, the sound of which I love more than any other words I've ever heard. I bought a mass-produced barbecued beef sandwich and a glass of milk for myself. Then we just poked around a while. The proprietor was a knobby, obliging old hick, and he watched us all real close to make sure we didn't try to lift any fertilizer. I wasn't about to try to rob, because I have a superstitious fear of old store owners in out-of-the-way places. Besides, if he was out here all alone, I thought he might have a knobby old shotgun or something. Suddenly, Michael got a wild look and ran straight at the old guy from across the store, and I was expecting fireworks when he stopped short and asked the man, did he have any fireworks? The old man said yes, he had fireworks, and right there before our very eyes, Michael went and bought $50 worth of the damn stuff. He turned to us with his eyes aglow and said, when we get to Washington, I could sell this stuff for 4 or 5 times what I paid for it and get us a really fine place. Come on, let's go show Susan. Chad and I looked at each other, knowing this guy had to be crazy, but we all piled back in the car, yes, and Michael shook Susan so hard I heard her teeth click. He examined his big plan and sat there grinning till she threw a handful of firecrackers in his face, screaming in her sexy cracker voice, "You take them damn things right back inside. What if we get stopped with your fool driving? We'd be in trouble, and we wouldn't have any money, and oh, you stupid ass." And all this time, she was throwing stuff around the car. Well, Chad and I were ducking Roman candles, and were kind of glad when he went, "Shut up, bitch," and clouted her on the side of the head, even though we were inclined to agree with her. We thought that would maybe quiet her down some, but she jumped on him and tried to stick her fingers in his eyes. Before she knew it, he got her head under his arm and was smashing her in the face. Chad and I were just getting ready to intervene, ha ha, when she got loose and jumped out of the car. She made a wild grab at her hair, but missed and turned to us all frustrated and said, "God damn it, I'll never get her now. She's faster than I am." I started to say something encouraging like, "Oh, I bet you can, Mike," when Chad interrupted in a small voice saying, "Hey, Michael, look out, man," and pointed. Out in front of the car, Susan had an enormous brick and was winding up. Mike hollered like a foghorn, "Susan, you chuck that thing and I'll beat the ever-loving—" She threw the brick on the ground and ran off the road, sobbing and spitting like a bobcat. He yelled after her, "You get back in this car or I'm leaving you right here, so help me." She didn't answer, so we started the car and drove about a quarter of a mile up the road and stopped. "I gotta go back and get her," he said, and jumped out the door.